He's also published more than 50 articles on these subjects and is responsible for overseeing the permanent conservation of some of the country's most significant archaeological sites. I hope we learn a lot more about that. Besides talking about the previous work that he's done, he'll give us a summary of the Washington County prehistory and history of Washington County and the work of the Washington County Historical Society. It's a lot of times to say Washington County, so here we are, and please welcome Andy Stout.
Thanks so much.
The lights a little.
Okay, dim the lights a little, that'd be fine. Can everyone hear me okay?
Yep.
No. The answer was no. How about that? Is that better?
Yeah.
Yes, I'll try to speak loudly. Okay. Well, thanks for coming out this evening and rainy Monday evening. Hope you're not here for the original speaker. Be a little disappointed, but hopefully we'll impress you and wow you nonetheless. Okay. So for this evening, what I'm going to do is just talk a little bit about myself and my career in cultural resources, and then I want to talk specifically about the Washington County Historical Society, and then you can just ask any questions when we get to the end if there are things archaeologically related that I don't discuss or that you'd like to know more about. So I thought I'd start with this. I don't know if you've been on the internet lately. Have you? This is all it is, it seems like. I'm involved in all these archaeology groups, and I just keep getting this stuff, right? It's either aliens or Bigfoot they're responsible for the pyramids and everything else. And while this is fun, it robs indigenous people, right, of their industry. So I have yet to come across any situation in prehistory that could not be explained in some way on my own experiences. So here, we'll start with a young Andy hacking my way through the jungle. And this was just a short time. I had a professor at Shippensburg University. I got my bachelor's degree in sociology with a minor in anthropology. And I had a professor that said, an archaeology professor, he said that if you're getting involved in archaeology because you think it's going to be like Indiana Jones, you should forget about it right now because everybody's already been everywhere. Everyone has already been everywhere, that's what he said. And 8 months later, I was whacking my way through the jungle, being chased by packs of wild dogs, and there were wild boa constrictors that fell out of trees, and plants that secreted sap that burned your skin, and tarantulas that poured out of our excavation units that we dug. So there's still a lot of adventure out there in the world to be had. Don't just because somebody else doesn't see it doesn't mean that you can't see it and go for it. So as a young person, I spent my 20s working for cultural resource management firms throughout the Mid-Atlantic and into Puerto Rico. This picture was taken in Puerto Rico. And I got to live there for several months, and we did a excavation of a Taino village, and Taino Indians are the people that discovered Columbus when he landed. And we also had to do surveys of rock shelters, and any place that was conducive to human habitation, we had to document it and do excavations there. So we got to run around the mountains and play in caves and look for ancient artifacts. It was pretty great. And the Taino village that we worked on was fantastic. This was a classic period Taino village from like 900 to 1400 AD. It had a central plaza. They had a complex chiefdom level society, and they had ball courts, very similar to Central America, and just some really great archaeology. After years of archaeology, which is great when you're in your 20s and just roaming around America, but as your priorities change and you want to maybe settle down a little bit, you look for some maybe other types of work. And so I parlayed my archaeological experience into a position at the National Archives and Records Administration, working on the presidential materials staff. So under President Clinton and President Bush II, myself and one other person took care of all the presidential gifts. all the gifts received by the president, all the gifts received by the president's family, all the gifts received by the vice president, and all the gifts received by the vice president's family. It was an amazing experience because not only did I get to work at the archives, but I had to go to the White House 2 days a week. If Hillary wanted a certain brooch, or if somebody was visiting a certain head of state, they would call, ask for that head of state's gift that he had given a year ago or something so that they could have it put out and display it as if it was always sitting there, right? So when, Yasser Arafat or whoever it was coming over, they could have their stuff out there. A fascinating position in the United States. We, the American people, are the owners of all the presidential gifts, unless they're under a certain dollar amount, and then the president can pay to retain those items, but it's a very nominal amount. And the types of gifts that the president gets, it ranges from weird beer bottles with seashells glued to them that your crazy uncle did, to amazing Sinbad quality jewels and riches of the world, gold encrusted swords and golden saddles from Saudi Arabia, and just like wealth beyond your comprehension. And that's all trucked away at the end of the presidential administration, and it's kept at the presidential library. And we have a national system. Since President Hoover, the United States has had a national system of presidential libraries, and those presidential gifts were transferred there. In the case of President Clinton, he had rented a former car dealership in Little Rock, and they had put these, metal shields over all the windows of this former car dealership. You couldn't tell what was going on in there, and all of the gifts from President Clinton's administration went to that facility until the presidential library could go. So my experience, not a lot of archaeologists work in archives, but the one commonality is that it was material culture, right? There are artifacts that you find in archaeological digs, and these were all artifacts, just gifts to the president. And then from that, a gift exchange is central premise in anthropology. Marcel Mauss wrote the famous book, The Gift, and early anthropologists were interested in gift exchange in places like the Trobriand Islands. And so I actually wrote my master's thesis on presidential gift exchange, and it's the first first anthropological work in the United States ever written with an anthropological perspective to presidential gift exchange. Okay, so moving right along. So I did that for exactly 1 year. And 9/11 happened, and American University waived all their graduate fees that year for some reason, and so I got a free ride, so I just went back to graduate school. And then while at graduate school, the World Archaeological Congress was meeting in Washington, D.C., and I became the public information officer for the Congress. Now, this is the only global body of archaeologists. Okay, so archaeologists from all over the world came to Washington, D.C., and every time they have a meeting, it moves to a different place in the world. But as a public information officer, I ended up writing over 200 press releases, and this was right around the time of the American war in Iraq, and the Baghdad Museum was looted. And so I got front page articles on the Washington Post and NPR stories, and ended up meeting all these archaeologists from all over the world, and co-edited this book with the chief archaeologist of the National Park Service at the time, Frank McManaman. And I don't know if you've ever tried to co-edit anything, but try doing it with authors from all over the world. It's madness. So it took a long time for this book to come out, several years, but this is one of my great contributions to the discipline, managing archaeological resources, just different perspectives from around the world and different projects. Okay, so how do we get to where we are today with preservation? And as an archaeologist, I have my archaeological preservation timeline. And it's kind of interesting because we have Thomas Jefferson, of course, is the father of American archaeology, okay? He was the first person to do an excavation, and he gave us the scientific method of, well, you have to have a reason to dig. You should publish your results in a timely fashion, etc. So he was sort of our first archaeologist. And then 1700, 1788, it's notable an Ohio land company spared a mound from demolition, right? Because they were just bulldozing all the other ones. It's notable because they actually didn't bulldoze that one down. And then it's 1813, 1816, effort to save Independence Hall. That's sort of the first big preservation effort that gets national attention. You have Yellowstone becomes the first park. Frank Cushion of the BAE, he headed out to the southwest to see the ruins of Casa Grande and found that they had already been looting occurring, right? As early as then. So we have the American Antiquities Act that's passed in 1906, and that's the first national effort to have some laws that preserve our resources. We saw the establishment of the Department of the Interior and the National Park Service. The Great Depression, the Civilian Conservation Corps went to work here in Washington County on some of our resources. National Park Service took over management of Revolutionary and Civil War battlefields. Historic Preservation Act of 1966. I skipped it, I don't have it on there, but Mount Vernon real early on was a preservation effort too. And that was just the Ladies Association of Mount Vernon. He still owns Mount Vernon to this day. A lot of people don't realize that. It just shows you the power of a small civic group and what can be done, right? So moving down in, you start to get national acts to preserve sites. The Archaeological Conservancy is founded in 1980. You have more legislation passed for NAGPRA to protect Native American graves, ARPA, and the Abandoned Shipwreck Act. But you know, the way, in layman's terms, the way that archaeology and protection works in the United States is that if it's on private property, it's yours, right? It's the private property. And that's for better and worse. A lot of times, significant sites exist today simply because a family preserved them. And people will say, well, Grandpa always said that that corner of the field was special and not to mess with it, you know, because that was a Native American site or whatever. And but at the same time, then you have situations where very important sites, even ones that are listed on the National Register of Historic Places, can be completely destroyed without any consequences at all because they belong to the private property owner. A lot of people don't realize that the National Register of Historic Places and National Register listing doesn't come with any protections at all, right? So you can do with it whatever you want to it, even though it's listed on the register. Essentially, it's just a really fancy list to let us know what we think is important. That's what the National Register is. So archaeology changed dramatically after this article was written by William Leap. And I know Dr. Leap, he's still alive. He lives in the Pacific Northwest. And you know, prior to this, in 1974, people were going out, they were excavating archaeological sites, they were digging up the sites, like the whole site, right? And so what Dr. Leap said was like, hold on a minute, we should take a conservation approach. That, you know, the archaeologists in the future are going to have better technologies than we do today. So if we dig up an entire site, we're not leaving any of it for future generations, right? We have to employ a conservation model. And he urged archaeologists the primary goal to identify, protect, and conserve archaeological sites. I had a conversation with a friend one time, and they said, well, what do I care about conservation? I'm an archaeologist, and archaeologists are destroyers, right? And what they meant by that is archaeology is a destructive process. You don't excavate the same thing twice, because after you do it the first time, it's gone, right? And so it's interesting that archaeologists who are doing destructive processes also have to be concerned about conserving that material at the same time, okay? And so sites must be protected and managed so they can yield an optimal amount of information. So my claim to fame is that I have personally been responsible for the preservation of more archaeological sites in the northeastern United States than any other person. That's my claim to fame. And someday I will not have that claim to fame because someone who came along after me will hopefully surpass my record. But one of the sites that I helped preserve is the Rosenstock site in Frederick, Maryland. And this site is the most significant Native American site in the city. It is within the city limits just barely. It's located directly across from the airport runway on the Monocacy River, if you're familiar with that at all. The plane's taking off on the runway flying directly over this site. Okay, so this is an entire Native American village site that dated from 1300 to 1450. Very well preserved. Montgomery Complex is what they refer to this time period and these people as. We don't have names for them. We don't know what they call themselves. Archaeologists give them names based on the pottery types that they had, okay? And so, I don't know, did anyone in here know Spencer Giese? Spencer Giese was an amazing guy. He was a World War II veteran who had lost half a leg in a German artillery barrage. And that's Spencer down there in the unit. He's probably responsible for recording more archaeological sites in Frederick County than any person. Thousands and thousands of artifacts he collected over the years. He donated all of those to the Mac Lab, thankfully. But just was a wealth of information. He passed away several years ago, but very active in local archaeology. And a really amazing site. Now, this site was originally under easement by the Maryland Historic Trust, but the airport retained an easement also on it, saying that they could go in and cut all the trees down at any time for the runway. So they're kind of conflicting. The supermarket corporation Aldi came to own the property, and I stepped in and got it donated to the Archaeological Conservancy, who now owns the property. And it's just a woodlot. You know, you wouldn't, if you looked at it today, you wouldn't know that there was anything there. Which is a lot of the sites in the Northeast. People say, hey, take us on a tour of all the prehistoric sites in Washington County or whatever, and we'd go look at a lot of cornfields and woodlots is what we would do, because that's what a lot of them look like on the surface. So going up to New York State, if you've ever been on the New York Thruway, you are going right through the heart of the Iroquois, or the Haudenosaunee, as they're called, land. And so going from left to right, from west to east, over it goes the Seneca, the Cayuga, the Oneida, the Onondaga, the Mohawk, and then the Mohegans are also on the far side. But so you have the 5 nations of the Iroquois, who were then, they were joined by the Tuscarora from North Carolina after the Tuscarora were defeated at the Battle of Fort Neoroka. They were an Iroquois-speaking group isolated from all the other Iroquois-speaking groups living in North Carolina. And after they're defeated that battle, they moved back up and they live up in northwest New York now. So at some time in deep prehistory, this group of Iroquois people must have moved from up there down south. Something happened to have them end up there anyway. It's very interesting. But so these are just some of the Iroquois villages in New York State that I help preserve, and they date from a variety of different periods. The interesting thing about these Iroquois sites are that European trade goods showed up at these sites long before any Europeans did. So we'll have sites that are pre-contact, that are just chock full of beads and gun parts and steel, copper pots and copper projectile points, because the European stuff arrived through the trade networks way before the first Europeans ever showed. And these would have been palisaded, massive longhouse villages, a matriarchal society. Women ran the longhouses, and they were separated by clans. Different clan groups, lived in the different longhouses. Here's a schematic of one of the villages, and some of the artifacts. You can see clearly that's a European person on a horse on a Native American-made bone cone. See. So I don't know if they had seen someone on a horse or they heard about horses, and then we have a turtle effigy pipe, a lot of animal effigies. The different clans have different animal names, and so you'll see a lot of animal effigies with the different clans. Moving down to Virginia, 2 of the sites that I've helped preserve are Kippax Plantation and the Pamplin Pipe Factory. Has anyone ever heard of the Pamplin Pipe Factory? Just out of curiosity. No. Awesome. You're all going to learn something new today. Great. Pamplin Pipe Factory. It operated from 1880s to 1952, contained evidence of a cottage industry for clay pipes that existed
in the area by the 1740s. Pamplin Smoking Pipe Manufacturing Company was the leading producer of pipes in the U.S., claimed it was the largest in the world, largest producer of tobacco pipes in the world, right there. There it is. Has anyone here ever been to Pamplin City, Virginia? Yes, all right. Now, did you blink and miss it, or did you actually see it? It's just south of Appomattox Courthouse in near Appomattox. And so I just love this story. So there was this tradition of Native American women that lived in Pamplin who were making tobacco pipes. And it's said that the Pamplin tobacco pipes give a sweeter taste to your tobacco, something about the clay. Nobody can tell you exactly what it is, just something about it. So you have these Native American women who were living down there in this cottage industry making these pipes. And this tobacco company out of Ohio sees this and they see a gold mine. So they come in and set up shop, hire all these women to work in their factory. And next thing you know, they got like the biggest pipe producing factory in the world, which was eventually driven out of business by what? Cigarettes. Yeah, that's what it was, cigarettes. Now, Pamplin pipes are said to have been smoked as the West was being settled. And there's a famous river boat that was excavated, but it's actually a terrestrial excavation. The river had changed course and left this river boat inland, right? And when they excavated the river boat, it was filled with crates containing Pamplin pipes. And the whole town of Pamplin is built on Pamplin pipes. It is insane. I saw pictures from the 70s where they were putting in a new sewer line, and there were citizens holding other citizens up by the ankles, down in holes, just buckets of pipes. Like the whole town is just built on all of these pipes. Look at these pipes. This is like the whole town. Somewhere, if you dig down a few feet, I think the whole town of Pamplin is built on. This is just one of the kilns. This is just some of the pipes that were on the property. Okay, they have various styles of pipes. You could special order your own design if you had something super neat. If you wanted your own face, maybe put on a pipe. They had a Powhatan pipe that they did. I have one. Should have brought it. It's a Robert E. Lee. They had a Robert E. Lee as a tobacco pipe, and you would have just stuck a simple reed, right? This is old time. Stuck a simple natural reed in there and used as your pipe stem, right? Okay, so that property, Pamplin Pipe Factory, the Pipe Factory building is still standing there. It's on the National Register. It's a permanent preserve and will be the site of future archaeological excavation. And so the other one in Virginia is the Kippax Plantation. And now Kippax, the most notable thing about Kippax is Pocahontas' granddaughter is buried out in the front yard. Now, she's not there anymore, supposedly, but just to cut right to the chase, that's the most notable thing. It was the home of Colonel Robert Bowling, and he was a mover and shaker, came over from England at the age of 16, and promptly married right into Powhatan's lineage, right? And he married Jane Rolfe, who was the granddaughter of Pocahontas and John Rolfe, okay? So this place is unlike any other place. We have lots of European sites, and we have lots of Native American sites. And we find, we have European sites where we find Native American stuff. We have Native American sites where we find European stuff. This was a site, this was a trading plantation. So this is the site where the Native Americans and the Europeans actually came together to do their exchanges. And it's a very unique site because of that. Let's see. Numerous trade items. Now, there's a current house. This looks like it could be anywhere in Washington County, doesn't it? There's a current house that stands on the property. And this is a view. This 10 acres is the entirety of Kippax Plantation. It is the last 10 acres of open space in the city of Hopewell, Virginia, more or less. Okay, they have some monuments in the front for Thomas Rolfe, son of Pocahontas. Trade beads out the wazoo. There's all these glass trade beads. These are probably from Italy. Italian trade beads. We have European-made gun hardware. This is from a rifle of some kind. Intact cellar with a shell midden. And colonoware, which would have been a pottery type made by African Americans using European forms in a Native American technology. Okay, colonoware. Pretty cool. Okay. And then, let's see, we'll just talk quickly about Upper Leaphart. This is one of the last villages of the Susquehannock Indians in Pennsylvania. The Susquehannocks were largely wiped out by the Paxtang boys in a terrible incident that occurred in 1700s. So there's no identified Susquehannock group today. In Pennsylvania, the only recognized tribe was the Seneca. And they might not even be federally or state recognized. They may just consult with them. It's different with each state, right? Depending on the Native Americans that you have in your area, who's recognized by the federal government, who's recognized by the state government, who isn't recognized at all, right? There's lots of different groups out there. So Upper Leaphart, Susquehannock Village, may have been home to 1,200 people, part of the Susquehanna National Heritage Area. And if you ever get a chance, Wrightsville, Pennsylvania, just gorgeous view of the river up there. They have a high point that's preserved. They have the upper and lower Leaphart sites, these two villages that are preserved, and some trails. And you can even, I think, you can rent kayaks and go out on the river there. It's really nice. This site, interesting story about this. So this was located on the Leaphart farm, okay? Is where it gets its name. It's where a lot of these archaeological sites get their names, from the farms where they were located. And this site was excavated or dug or looted, whatever you want to say, by the Leaphart family, okay? And in particular, one member of the Leaphart family who got the moniker Digger Leaphart, because he dug so much of this site. Digger dug so much of this site that Digger ended up with a broken back and walked hunched over the entire latter part of his life, which is when I met him. And I tried to acquire both the site to preserve it as well as Digger's massive artifact collection, right? Because again, this is a contact period site, so we've got tons of European trade goods. These folks, they find full breastplates of European armor helmets. There's a report that the village up from Leaphart, they actually had a cannon that they used to fire at goats going up the river. I mean, these people had like the best stuff. They were trading with the Spanish, with the Dutch, with the English. So Digger dug all this stuff up, and I tried to get it, and I couldn't get the stuff. Digger was not interested in that. Digger died. Digger gave all the stuff to his children when he died, and those children promptly sold that all off for something like $100,000, I think is what the collection brought. So the collection is gone. There are pieces of it that are in the State Museum, but the good news is the site was saved. So we established the entire site as an archaeological preserve. It's there to this day. There are portions of it that are still look like the landscape of the moon from all the digging that has occurred there in the past, right? Which to me is a real travesty, because that's information that we just don't have and we'll never know. I've seen some of the artifacts that came from there, but they'll be lost to time if they're not in the museum. There's a permanent display at the Pennsylvania State Museum on the site. And so, again, you can see there's a metal breastplate right there, European metal breastplate. There's some European pottery. Here's some stoneware, and then iron axe heads. It's a really lovely exhibit that they did. And you can see they have an artist's interpretation of the palisade of the village back here. Here's a little site I preserved over in Mercersburg, Pennsylvania. It's a late woodland, another late woodland period village site. This was discovered by an archaeologist visiting his mother-in-law, and he walked out into the field behind her house and saw a groundhog hole and noticed that there was a piece of Native American pottery laying next to it. So he dug a test unit there, and 5 pounds of prehistoric pottery later, he thought, wow, this is probably a site. And it was. And so, as I was saying earlier, to look at this today, you would never know. It's just this agricultural field. It's right next to the Little League field in downtown Mercersburg. If you drive in to the ball field, there's a white wooden fence on your right-hand side, and that's it. And here's the site. And the ball field itself in Mercersburg is probably built right on top of a continuation of this village or just a separate site. There were burials reported there along the stream in the 1950s. Okay, last one that's not in Washington County. Okay, so Ebert Spring. Has anybody been to Ebert Spring? Yeah, all right. Look at you. You've been everywhere already. So the Ebert Spring Archaeological Preserve and Heritage Park, I encourage everybody to go visit it. It's open every day of the week from dusk to dawn. Great place to go for a walk or walk your dog. And this was a 10-year plus project. Really, it was. So, you know Greencastle, right? You know Greencastle. Sure. It's not, my dad was the town barber growing up in Greencastle. And it was very Mayberry-esque living there when I lived there in the 70s. There were 2 police cars and 2 stoplights. Kept it simple. It's not that way anymore, though. It's changed quite a bit. So Antrim Township, people always say, what's a Greencastle Antrim? What's that all about? Well, it's Antrim Township. Greencastle's the town. Antrim's the township. Okay, so see if you know where this is. So this is kind of how it looks today. You know where the new Sheets is? On Route 11 and 81? Here, right here in this white space is where the Mason-Dixon auto auction is. Yeah, everybody knows Mason-Dixon auto auction, right? So here's the sheet. So when I started on this project, nothing that you see there was there. That's just open field. The only thing that was there when I started on this project was the home of Al Bennell. And that's what this white spot is in this long antebellum lane. So the local chapter of the Pennsylvania Archaeological Society had discovered this site and started excavating there. And thanks to them, we now know about it. It changed our way of thinking about prehistory in this area. That's what this site did. Hugely significant, yeah. So, and I'll try to make this as short as possible, but essentially over 10 years, what I did was I started to buy pieces of property, right? And this was for the Archaeological Conservancy, a national nonprofit. And so, well, the first one we got for free, it was 3.4 acres that the developer donated to us. Actually, it was Mr. Perini, who first owned this property, right? He donated this 3.4 acres, and it was really smart because the Army Corps of Engineers has a federal wetland permit for these 2 springs that are in this wooded area here. And for any type of development to take place there, I mean, it would just be insane. It wouldn't be possible, really. So Perini did the smart thing. He donated this for preservation, and he got to take the whole thing as a tax write-off, right? And it fell within the local township wanting to establish this no blasting zone around their springs. The one spring was originally used as Greencastle's water source, and it produces 60,000 gallons of water a minute. It's amazing. So the first thing was get the 3.4 acre parcel. And the next thing we tried to do was get Mr. Bennell's property here in the middle that I talked about earlier. So significance of the site is that it's eligible for the National Register. It changed our way of thinking about prehistoric people on the landscape. It's connected to the founder of Greencastle. I'm about to show you the only standing structure built by the founding family of Greencastle, Pennsylvania. Okay, and it's on this property that we preserved. May have a French and Indian War fort on it. We're not 100% sure about that. And it has a very deep time depth. As long as people have been on the landscape, they have been coming to this one spot. From Paleo-Indian to modern industrial times, this one spot. And it was for the springs. Here's a layout of the land. Here's Mr. Bennell's house. It was built in 1756, fieldstone house. The spring house, which they believe the base of the spring house is original, and that the top part of the spring house was replaced at some point. And then Mr. Bennell's yard. Essentially, Mr. Bennell's house and yard is all a massive archaeological site, prehistoric and historic. Here's some pictures from around the property. The spring was filled with 100 smashed toilets, believe it or not, when I found it. Cleaned all that up. Looks much better now. Allison family. William Allison came to Greencastle from Ireland. He had 3 sons, John, Patrick, and William Jr. John served in the Revolutionary War. Patrick was in the ministry, and William lived in the house. Allison Ebert House. It's believed that William built the house with his father. And James Allison was the last family member to live in the house. So there's the house, there's the spring house again. There is a Fort Allison that was built in 1756. Its location is not known. There is a possibility that the spring house may have been used as, quote unquote, Fort Allison. There are other examples of wealthy, prominent families building fortified structures close enough so they could run out the door to get to it, right? And that building, the spring house, definitely meets that mark. There is another structure that's no longer standing that is another candidate for possibly being Fort Allison. And it's located off Route 11 behind the old beer distributor, or the current beer distributor, I guess, on Route 11, near Tony's Pizza. So Indian Lifeways in Pennsylvania, speaking broadly, Maryland, Pennsylvania, our area, Franklin County, Washington County, more or less the same time depth, right? We have Paleo-Indian, we have our Archaic period, we have the development and invention of pottery, prehistoric pottery, the woodland period, people are settling down in villages, we have contact period and a historic period after Europeans show up. And this site, Ebert Spring, has every time period. Thousands and thousands and thousands of arrowheads, right? From the Archaic period, there's one Clovis point that was found, a lot of Archaic points, a lot of woodland pottery. So throughout time, people kept coming back to this one place because of the karst topography spring that still to this day produces 60,000 gallons a minute, right? A lot of times what made a great place for a home in prehistory still makes a great place for a home today. So I won't bore you with all of this, but essentially it was a multi-pronged attack that took 10 years and several different parcels together until we eventually ended up with a 12.56 acre archaeological preserve and heritage park, okay? It goes down the antebellum lane, which is still there. You can drive your car right down there. You have to look for the lane because that's the hard part. You can miss it really easy. It's just a gravel driveway. But if you look for the lane, you can see there's a gate down there with some signage. There's a place to park your car. You can get out and walk around. We have, we partnered, it's up the Archaeological Conservancy, the Allison Antrim History Museum, Antrim Township, TAPCO. Those were the main financiers and players in the whole deal. But it also involved the school district and South Mountain Partnership and the Department of Conservation and Natural Resources. It was $1.4 million in real estate. How about that? People say, historic preservation, you get everybody, the businessman's ears perk up when you start talking about $1.4 million preservation projects and the value of preservation. You know, all totaled, it cost us it was over a $500,000 deal probably when it was all said and done. So we made a great bargain, you know, on it because it's $1.4 million of property. But so the plans for the public interpretation it's already been completed, the preservation of it, low impact. We've added it to the school curriculum, produced a booklet that went with it. There's a series of interpretive kiosks at the site that they tell the story of all of prehistory and history, as well as the history of Greencastle. And it's very rare that you find a site that you can do that at, right? One site can tell you about every time period, okay? So and there's the actual Clovis point that was found at the site. Right there. And then we opened it, we have some about Greencastle history, and this is Philip Baer, and he's the founder of Old Home Week in Greencastle. He was an Italian-trained opera singer who then went on to play in vaudeville shows. And does everyone know what Old Home Week is? Old Home Week, it's the triennial town reunion every 3 years. Everybody from Greencastle comes back to Greencastle. So we opened the site at Old Home Week. 1,000 people came to the opening of the preserve, and they even put the spring house on the Old Home Week badge that year. This would have been two Old Home Weeks ago, I guess. This is 6 years ago. Okay. And that was that. So, cultural resource conservation success involves collaborations, honesty, trust, and mutual respect. And just, I'm the shadiest person in these pictures. I don't know. Getting handed a check. Did anybody see? I got handed a jumbo check last week by United Way for a grant that they gave us. But this is just a small check. This is the Bowling family donating money to the preservation of Kippax Plantation. The Bowling family is the largest family association in the United States. And they're directly connected to John and Robert Bowling from the Kippax Plantation. And then we have our current Secretary of the Interior, Deb Havlin. Here I am this is the most famous man in Mexico. Not anymore because he's passed away. But this is the legendary Juan Quesada. And Juan Quesada is a famous potter. And part of what I did in the preservation work, it also takes a lot of education, and heritage tourism is a big part, getting people out to sites, to see sites. And so in taking people to see sites and visiting sites myself, I ended up all over Mexico, all over most of continental US, and half of Canada. And in all those travels, I got to go to some great places. And just real quickly as an aside, Juan Quesada, so he lives down near the World Heritage Site of Paquime, it's called. And it's in the Chihuahua province of Mexico, okay? And so Juan, originally, he's a poor farmer that collects firewood when he doesn't have enough money. That's how he tries to make his ends meet, okay? Dirt poor, these people are. Well, Juan would find these pieces of pottery, prehistoric pottery in the woods, and they caught his interest. A lot of them had little faces on them and stuff. And so Juan taught himself how to make pots in the ancient style, like the World Heritage Site of Paquime. And this site of Paquime, this is the site where turquoise was coming down from the southwest, shell was coming in from the coast, exotic parrots and things were coming up from the jungles, and they actually excavated turkey pens and parrot pens at this site. And so it was a tremendous place of wealth and influence. And so here's Juan, hundreds and hundreds, thousands of years later, finding the pottery, teaching himself how to make it, and he makes this pottery, okay. And so a gringo is traveling around with his mother, going to thrift shops in Texas one day, and he comes across some pottery made in the traditional Mata Ortiz style, right? The ancient Mexican native pottery. And he says, "Where'd you get this pottery at?" And the guy at the thrift store says, "I don't know, some family traded it for clothes or something, I don't know." So he puts his mother in his beat up old Datsun, and they drive down into Mexico, and every village they come to, he's like, "Do you know who made these pots?" Because he had seen other people try to make these pots, and these were the best versions that he'd ever seen. So long story short, this guy becomes Juan Quesada's patron. Juan Quesada becomes the most famous artist in all of Mexico. He gets gallery shows by just walking into galleries and putting his pot on the curator's desk, right? I mean, you can Google him, and he transformed the life of his entire village of Mata Ortiz. He then taught his neighbors how to make pots, and the neighbors taught their neighbors how to make pots. So you go to this village today, completely impoverished still, but people from all over the world come there to buy the pottery from Mata Ortiz. It's just a great story of archaeology and anthropology in the past and the present, and everybody using it to come together and really make out well. And then right down here in the corner, this is Raymond the Pipe Man Dickerson. He's the reason that the Pamplin Pipe Factory was preserved. He bought it, and he used to run auctions out of there. He was descended from one of the Native American women who was the original pipe makers. And he donated his entire collection of pipes and pipe molds and all the equipment, and that's now at the Department of Historic Resources in Richmond. Okay, Thank goodness, 15 minutes, we got Washington County. 15 minutes, we can do it. To preserve and promote the history of Washington County, Maryland, this is the mission statement of the Historical Society. And a lot of people may not know what exactly the Historical Society is. It's a nonprofit organization with over 350 members. It runs the Miller House Museum with over 10,000 plus artifact and document collection. And we run the Kinship Family Heritage Research Center for genealogical research. And people from all over the United States come to the Miller House Museum and the Kinship Center to do research on their families from Washington County. It's pretty amazing. Whew. When I arrived, has everybody heard the story about my cannon? No? Okay, well, I'll tell you. So, I found this cannon. I found a Revolutionary War cannon last year laying on a farmer's trash pile. And it was down off of Rock Bottom Lane. Sounds like a good story, doesn't it? So this is a big cannon. This is a cannon for a ship or a fort. 32-pounder based on the dimensions, and it weighs around 800 pounds. We're guessing. I haven't picked it up yet. Haven't tried to. There's a picture of it. It's not a whole cannon. I'd say it's 3/4 of a cannon. It's a lot of cannon. Well, but Hagerstown, Washington County, we got cannons everywhere, don't we? Now, anybody who knows where this cannon's from? This is in front of the Hager House. And this cannon, my cannon, came from the same place. So this is what the plaque there says. Even though it wasn't completed, it tells a unique story. The sprue is still attached to that cannon, the sprue. And whoever did this just did a great job. I love this interpretive kiosk over there at the Hager House. And we owe all these cannons to this gentleman, Carl Schaefer. And I love this map. It's like right there. That's where Carl found all those cannons, right? X marks the spot. And these were some resources that were in the Historical Society. But essentially, he was a retired school teacher. And he got to digging around. One account says that he and his wife were out in the potato patch one day and his hoe went clink. And he came down and he found a whole cannon buried in his garden. Revolutionary War cannon. And so he got the fever. And so he started finding cannons everywhere. And the one that, and he actually had decorated his front yard, if anybody knows, right off of Mount Etna traffic circle. If you head towards the volunteer fire department up the mountain. He used to live in a rancher house, and the front yard of it was filled with cannons and various things that he had dug up over the years. And I knew this. I remember seeing all those out there. And the way I came about my cannon was that I was just driving by one day and happened to notice that all those cannons were gone now. And so I just pulled in and I just asked him, I said, hey, whatever happened to all those cannons? And the guy was like, well, they all got sold off in an auction, but there's one still kicking around out at the farm somewhere. I'll call my husband and see what he has to say. And so husband said, yeah, well, we got a cannon out here. Come on down. So I drove out, and sure enough, it's one of the cannons from the front yard had ended up on this farmer's scrap pile because he and his family had bought the rancher house, and they were living there. So the Hughes family are the makers of all these cannons. Okay, we have Barnabas Hughes was the father, and he came over from Ireland. And then he established Mount Etna Furnace and the Antietam Iron Works Complex. Okay, Daniel and Samuel were his sons, and they took over and they continued the ownership of it until 1827. They ran forges in Washington County and several in Pennsylvania. The importance of Mount Etna Furnace lies in its contribution to industry in the colonies and early republic, as well as its role in providing weaponry to the American Army during the Revolution and probably also during the War of 1812. Some scholars define this as the first military industrial complex in America, right? It was private people commissioned by the government to make arms here in Washington County. And there again, Mr. Schaefer and his Red Star. And this actually shows a second furnace location. This is the topo map of it. It doesn't do much for us, does it? But it's right here behind the fire hall. The Antietam Furnace Complex, it's the earliest of the Washington County iron furnaces, and the archaeology was done there in 1982. Plan view of it, if you're coming down the road, Mount Etna Road right here, here's the fire hall. Here was the main furnace stack right back in here. This area is believed to have been workers' housing. And if you drive out there anytime soon, the county recently, clear cut or plowed this corner for better visibility. But you can see a lot of foundations and remnants in here from the furnace. A plan view from the stack, from the archaeology that was done there. And there's a photograph of it, not much to look at, is it? This actually sits, if you go there and drive behind the fire hall, there's a yellow utility shed. Like you would buy at Lowe's or something and have it dropped in your yard, and that's sitting right on that spot where that stack is located. Here's one of the fire backs that they found when they excavated this. So in addition to cannons, they were making all manner of metal objects there. Tools, fire backs, hose. The original stack would have looked something like this, right? Something substantial. So 18th and 19th century iron ore production, they used a blast furnace like this, and they had to carefully weigh it. They used charcoal and limestone to stack and heat it to create the blast of air. You needed a temperature of 1300 to 1500 degrees to melt the iron, the ore. And here's the way the furnace worked with the water wheel and the billows there. Oh. And we have one of our iron foundry workers here. I actually never knew what the term pig iron meant until I got into researching this, and it was this next image that did it for me. So the term pig iron, you can see all the little piglets, right? All these little piglets right here suckling off the mother pig. That's where the term pig iron comes from. I was like, what's pig iron? Oh, it's kind of iron. Yeah, pig iron. Johnny Cash sings about pig iron, doesn't he? I think there's a Johnny Cash song about it. Loads of pig iron. And then the iron ore excavation. So there are entire sides of the hillside still today that just look like natural big sloping hillside that are not natural at all. They're iron ore cuts from hundreds of years ago. The Collier's hut. I say, boy, these must have been a great, real fun group of guys, huh? The Colliers, sitting out in the woods by yourself, living in your little Collier hut, stoking the fires and making all that charcoal. I'm sure they were real people, people pleasers. And then here's a image of the charcoal making process. So they described it as the mountainside looked like Dante's Inferno or Mordor from Lord of the Rings. It was just on fire and smoldering. Okay, as I said before, central to the first military-industrial complex, unmatched by any other furnace establishment. So that's something to stick your feather in here. Daniel and Samuel Hughes. Then, of course, what do people do when they make money and gain influence? They use that money and influence to gain more money and influence, right? So he helped form Washington County, 1776. Served on the first board of the county commissioners, and Samuel served the first House of Delegates. Okay, so that was the story about my cannon. We've since gotten a grant to have it turned into a monument in the back of the Miller House. So we'll have our own piece of Mount Etna here in downtown Hagerstown. Okay, so some people may not know this, but the Washington County Historical Society has really shaped the way that we see our community and the way our community looks. And it started out preserving sites, much like I was talking about at the beginning of my lecture here. But so sites like the Hager House would not exist had they not been acquired by the Washington County Historical Society. Washington Monument Park would not exist had it not been acquired by the Washington County Historical Society. Burnside Bridge would not exist. Dunker Church at Antietam Battlefield would not exist. It was the Washington County Historical Society
that had the vision to preserve these places. There's pictures of the Dunker Church restoration. Fort Frederick was not acquired by the Washington County Historical Society, but the Historical Society lobbied extensively to make sure that the site was preserved and turned into a state park. I actually did some archaeology at Fort Frederick once, and the most notable thing that we found was the trowel of the archaeologists that excavated there in the 70s. And we also found, Fort Frederick was used by a farmer to keep his livestock in for a while, and we found remnants of a chicken coop in the one bastion. That was our big finds at Fort Frederick. Not too exciting on the French and Indian War. Also, the Miller House Museum, of course, aka the Price Miller House. It's property and pottery of Peter Bell. A lot of people don't know this, but the famed Bell family of potters north of Mason-Dixon is here in Hagerstown started. And then it was Peter's son, John, in Waynesboro that was the most famous of the potters. But so his house and kiln might still have an archaeological signature there on the property. We don't know. There's never been any archaeology. But based on other Bell pottery sites that I've worked on, it should be chock full, just thousands and thousands of redware, busted redware sherds, kiln furniture, etc. And the Miller House was donated to the Society in 1966. The Society, as I mentioned before, we have the Kinship Family Heritage Research Center. People from all over the country come here to do their research. We have a monthly lecture series, Culture and Cocktails, which sells out every month. It's the second Friday, so you should check that out. One of the upcoming lectures is going to be by my wife, who is a noted children's book author, and she is the granddaughter of the Beck family who ran Beck's Tavern in downtown Hagerstown. Now, my father came to Greencastle by way of Iowa during the Cold War, and he was stationed at Site A outside of Greencastle, which has now been decommissioned. But he said that he and all the fellas, if they wanted to have a good time on a weekend, that they would hitchhike to Beck's Tavern, and they would go there and to another place called the Rainbow Room around the corner, and there was a gal that sang in a giant champagne glass, and there was a fellow that played two trumpets at once. Quite the place. Now, when I met my wife then, and we got to talking one day, my dad was like, "Oh my gosh, you own Beck's Tavern." Why? He had met my mother-in-law when they were much younger. So, good old Beck's. Now, Mr. Beck was a German man who ran his German restaurant during World War II. He was so German that he had a German Shepherd dog named Bismarck. And so people thought that he was a spy. And what my wife is going to be talking about is a book that she wrote called A Tiny Piece of Sky about the persecution of that family and a desire to run them out of town. But there was, luckily for him, they were a well-known family, and as many letters as there were saying we think that Mr. Beck might be a spy, there were a lot of letters saying no, he's a very fine, upstanding citizen, and we shouldn't, run them out of town. And just to get a free plug, since we are at the library, my wife's new book, Anatomy of Lost Things, comes out soon, and it just received a starred Kirkus review, which is something that every author tries to. It's a middle grade novel, okay? So getting a plug in there at the library. We launched a curating community initiative this year where we're trying to improve the Miller House and the facilities and the collection, and also do more public outreach and find more ways to interact with our community. We started an Adopt an Artifact program, and we currently are having this painting curated. We're launching a series of bus tours. We're going to do 4 bus tours this year. Historic Houses of Worship, Potomac River Prehistory and History, Historic Homes Architectural Tour, and Fort Ritchie Catoctin History Tour. Okay, doing 4 buses, 4 bus tours. You don't have to be a member to go on those. They're open to anyone. The first one, you can sign up now, May 18th. And we'll go to some places that you normally don't get to see inside. Dahlgreen Chapel is one of those on South Mountain. Anybody ever been in Dahlgreen Chapel? I got married at Dahlgreen Chapel. We're also doing a big event this year for the 160th anniversary of the Ransom of Hagerstown. So on June 22nd, we're going to have a lecture and fundraiser with Stephen Bachmiller, and then on the 29th, we're going to have a Ransom Public History Day. We're doing a new Ransom exhibit at the museum. We're going to have some Confederate cavalry take over the town. The mayor's going to give a proclamation. It's going to be amazing. Okay, the Washington County Historical Society is you. It's your historical society. It's about you. You make it happen. You should get involved. We'd love to have you at our events or as a member or maybe on a committee. Anything. Okay, and that I think is the end of my presentation. Covered a lot of ground.
Any questions from the audience? I have one question. Is it really true about the dog named his one?
Yeah.
Are you making that up?
No, that was true.
That was my question. I don't know.
Any questions?